Call of the Netherdeep is the newest official first-party adventure by Wizards of the Coast, and the second official crossover with the live play giant Critical Role.
Ah, my eyes! Oh god, it's like walking in on freeze in the shower!
It features underwater dungeons, a rival adventuring party, and a central conflict that's cosmological in scale. We've taken a cursory look at the material that's presented, and we're here to answer the question, is this book worth purchasing and adding to my collection? Hi, I'm John from Incendium D&D, and today I'm here to give my initial thoughts on Call of the Netherdeep. So before diving deep into what Call of the Netherdeep has to offer, first I wanted to get the usual disclaimers out of the way. It's funny how often I have to say this. If you've seen our video reviews on Tal'Dorei Reborn or The Legend of Vox Machina, then you'll know I'm not really a big fan of Critical Role's live play, although more and more I'm becoming a big fan of Exandria. Despite not connecting with the live play medium, I find Exandria is an awesome kind of classic D&D setting that fulfills a lot of the expectations of new players. So when listening to this review, just keep in mind that I'm not a big Critical Role fan, but I really do love D&D, and I do like Tal'Dorei Reborn and Explorer's Guide to Wildemount. Last but not least, this is an adventure book, so if you're not a DM, if you're a player, my recommendation actually isn't to listen to this review or pick up this book. There are going to be some spoilers here on out, so if you don't want the surprise spoiled for you, now's your time to turn back.
Captain!
Yeah?
No!
Oh! No!
So one thing I look for in any published adventure by Wizards of the Coast is what new unique element it adds or explores for 5th edition system. Or another way to put it is what lessons can it teach a DM who's trying to be a well-rounded storyteller. For example, Curse of Strahd had a focus on gothic horror themes and really helped DMs learn how to use atmospheric descriptions in order to hook their players into a setting. Dragon Heist offered a small, focused story that really emphasized social interaction and investigative work, and Rime of the Frost Maiden showed how interesting travel can be and how dangerous the wilderness can be if you're not properly prepared. Because of this, I find that the best adventure modules, and the ones that the community tends to latch onto the best, are ones that are unique and memorable. And it's why you don't see a whole lot of discussion about something like, I don't know, Princes of the Apocalypse. Besides a vague storyline about elemental cultists, there's really nothing about Princes of the Apocalypse's like dungeon design that makes it stand out against things like Tomb of Annihilation or Dungeon of the Mad Mage. So where does Call of the Netherdeep land? Because it's an underwater game. Call of the Netherdeep offers guidance about how to run underwater adventures, as well as a rival adventuring party that frequently crosses paths with the main characters. I mean, I feel like they just literally looked at the underwater temple in Zelda and was like, yeah, that's a good idea. Kidding aside, something I do want to be very upfront about is there aren't any really new rules to underwater exploration. Unlike, say, Ghosts of Saltmarsh, which added a whole appendix about ship exploration and ship-to-ship combat, there's a very brief section about the rules for underwater exploration and underwater combat that we've already seen in either the Player's Handbook or the Dungeon Master's Guide, I forget which one. But what it does do is have a number of underwater locations that serve as a kind of template for what an underwater adventure might look like. And there are even little things sprinkled in, like at one point the party discovers a scroll, and it does describe the scroll is soaked, but it still works. Interesting idea. So if for whatever reason you were really excited for having kind of generic setting agnostic rules for underwater exploration, can't really recommend the book on that alone. However, there's a lot of times where, like Chris Perkins has said in a number of interviews, all you need is a good map. These adventures are built with kit bashing in mind. So things like monster stat blocks, maps, even ideas like having a rival adventuring party. They're meant to be repurposed and used for your own custom game, but it may take a lot of background conversion work for it all to fit. The underwater element certainly makes this adventure unique and memorable, unlike Prince's.
Blasphemy! He said it again!
But to me, it's not worth picking up the book on its own. That being said, the other major component that this book really explores is the use of a rival adventuring party as a storytelling device. Like Pokemon, when you hit the major story beats of the game, your rival just starts strolling on in right at the last moment. Now, the rival characters are all pretty well fleshed out with unique personalities, goals, and insecurities. And while I like the individual rival characters presented here, and even the idea of the main player characters having a rival adventuring party, there is a danger here. I've been playing D&D in a variety of modules and home campaigns pretty regularly for the past few years. This is not the first time I've encountered this idea of a rival adventuring party. The very real danger here is that the DM falls in love with the NPCs and accidentally gives them a disproportionate amount of spotlight time, which can make the players feel like they're not really playing the game as much as just watching the DM describe what the rivals are doing. It's a real temptation, and I've seen it happen a few times. I mean, even at the end of the adventure's first major plot point, when the MacGuffin is revealed, there's a good chance that depending on how previous choices and luck elements rolled out, that the rivals are the heroes of the story. Now, I know some players that would actually be interested in exploring that storytelling angle, that their player characters end up more as supporting cast for the heroes of destiny that are NPCs. And that way the player characters almost have to like forge their own destiny despite not being the chosen ones. But this idea can be very difficult to execute and keep the player characters feeling meaningful, and it's not everybody's cup of tea. There are a lot of story threads to manage. It can be difficult to keep track of. Because of that, I really can't in good faith recommend this adventure for newer DMs. Although I will say personally, this is my cup of tea. I think the social exploration and the ideas presented here are really interesting, and I would actually really like to run this adventure myself. And the book is also very honest in its introductory chapter about how much work the DM has on their plate, and has warnings about the rival party becoming the story's focus instead of the player characters. It's very self-aware in that way, and it's something I respect. Now, the other thing to consider is that this adventure is very much tied to Exandria. I can think of ways to kind of pull some of the concepts of this adventure out of that setting to either integrate into a custom setting or repurpose some of the story threads to fit into a published setting, but it's going to require a lot of work. Now, that being said, if previously you've purchased Explorer's Guide to Wildmount, you are going to get your fair share of mileage out of that other book. It says you don't need Wildmount to run this adventure. I actually agree, you don't need it, but man, are you going to be more confident in running it if you have that other book. And it even calls out Wildmount specifically as like content that is legal for this adventure. And a significant part of this adventure takes place in Xhorhas. So my recommendation would be, if you do end up running this adventure, not a bad idea to pick up Wildmount as well. And once your characters have reached 13th level at the end of this adventure, if you have Wildmount, maybe they end up exploring other parts of the continent or other parts of the world of Exandria. So if this book isn't really good for new DMs, and also doesn't have a lot of setting agnostic content, who do I recommend it for? Well, the obvious answer is for players that love Critical Role or Exandria as a setting and want to play an adventure in it. Even though I can't recommend this for new DMs, it doesn't make it a bad product. I certainly believe that if you are a more experienced DM, this product is really good for you, especially if you're okay with putting a little bit of extra legwork into your background prep. I do think there's a lot of ideas in this book that can be repurposed for your own custom campaign. And now, to defend this book from some criticisms.
Draw your last pathetic card so I can end this, Yugi. I am really gonna enjoy this.
A common thing I've been hearing about Netherdeep is that this is a railroady adventure. And yes, this is a very linear adventure. I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that when you have a linear adventure, it makes the ideas a lot more focused and a lot more cohesive. I am definitely not one to criticize a linear adventure just because it's linear. I feel like a lot of times people get sensitive about linear adventures because they feel like their players' choices aren't going to matter. And even though this book is pretty linear in construction, there are several points where players can affect the outcome, both with the choices that they make and with luck elements presented throughout. I mean, we've been talking about the rival adventuring party, but they could either be enemies, you know, like a thorn in the player's side, or they could be allies and friends. It all depends on how the players decide to interact with them earlier on in the adventure. I've also heard criticism that this book recycles a lot of conceptual ideas from previous products. And like, yeah, it does, but it does it well. Again, spoilers. The final battle in this adventure has 3 stages where when the party defeats the first stage of the final boss, it then presents the next stage. The 3 stages are representative of the torment of a demigod, and the players have to navigate his anguish, his callousness, and his weariness. It's a really cool, well-structured final fight that I think would make an excellent climax to a campaign. But I've heard a lot of people draw comparisons to the final battle against Auril in Rime of the Frost Maiden, just because that book also has a 3-stage encounter. Just because the fight's structures are similar doesn't mean that the meaningfulness or the storytelling of those 2 battles are the same thing. Auril is a goddess, and what you're doing through the 3 stages of her encounter are breaking down her more mythological appearance down to its most abstract elemental form. And yes, there is a way to quell her through social interaction so that you don't have to fight her, but Elixion, the final boss of Netherdeep, is a much more human fight where you're helping him become redeemed. And yes, I know Zariel's redemption was a major plot point in Avernus. The journey, relationship, and structure of the final bosses, they all have their place. Just because you bought Rime of the Frost Maiden doesn't mean that Netherdeep doesn't have any value, and it's not the same story. I find the adventure fresh enough and some of the ideas unique enough that even though there might be some structural similarities to some previous products, Call of the Netherdeep does stand on its own. I know there have been plenty of times throughout this review I've said I can't recommend this book for certain reasons, but overall I really like Call of the Netherdeep. For fans of Critical Role, someone wanting to run novel exploration environments, or guidance on running a rival adventuring party, I can give this book a solid recommendation. I can't really recommend it for DMs that are newer or less confident or were looking for setting agnostic content. But by no means do I think that makes it a bad product. In fact, I would go so far to say that I actually like Exandria as, say, like a default classic D&D setting more than Faerun. And I really wouldn't mind further crossover adventure products where we get to explore more of Exandria, so long as we don't get any more Magic the Gathering crossovers. So, do you like Call of the Netherdeep? Which part of this book are you most interested in or most excited for? Let us know in the comments down below. Remember to like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell, and we'll see you next time. Have an awesome day, everybody. Bye-bye now.